The prehistoric ocean was far more than merely hazardous. It was an aquatic nightmare realm where terrifying beasts with enormous eyes prowled through endless blackness. And remarkably, a number of these horrors persist even now, concealed in the least explored regions of our world. Sure, we consider today's ocean frightening, and that's understandable. It holds great whites, giant squids, and whatever else remains undiscovered down there. But the ancient seas operated on an entirely separate scale of dread. Imagine this: you're suspended in waters so profound that sunlight surrendered its reach about half a mile back. The pressure would pulverize you instantly. Temperatures linger just above freezing. And in this pitch-black, bone-crushing abyss, life didn't merely survive. It thrived, grew bizarre, expanded massively, and perfected the craft of slaughter. You see, back then the deep ocean was where evolution veered completely off course. No sunlight meant no plants, forcing every creature below to improvise wildly for its next meal. Some developed gigantic eyes to snare the faintest flicker of light. Others simply abandoned sight altogether. A few even manufactured their own glow and brandished it like underwater assassins wielding flashlights. The truly disturbing element is that these weren't fleeting freaks of nature that appeared for a handful of million years and then vanished. In fact, they were already ancient when dinosaurs were still learning how to stand upright. And here's what truly unsettles me. We only know about the ones that left behind fossils. Most deep-sea organisms simply dissolve upon death. So for every horrifying prehistoric sea monster we've uncovered, there are probably a dozen even more appalling ones that we'll never know existed. Like, imagine 12 creatures out there even more nightmarish than the megalodon. The deep ocean back then was essentially a horror film that played for 500 million years, starring entities that would make H.P. Lovecraft lose his lunch. Giant eyes piercing the eternal dark. Teeth that wouldn't fit inside mouths. Beings that haven't altered their killing tactics since before your great-great-great times a million grandmother was a mere spark in some primordial broth. Meet the Ophthalmosaurus. This creature existed 150 million years ago and possessed eyes the size of dinner plates. And not tiny ones either. We're talking full-sized, elegant restaurant dinner plates. Each eyeball measured 9 inches across, larger than most basketballs. Now, you might be thinking, oh, big eyes. Big deal. Well, those massive orbs weren't just decorative. They existed to see in total darkness while plunging deeper than most nuclear submarines venture today. This reptile could hold its breath for more than 20 minutes and dive beyond 3,000 feet into water so black you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. Why would any creature choose that? Simple. Dinner waited down there. The strangest detail is how expertly it performed this role. While other marine reptiles splashed about in shallow waters devouring fish, Ophthalmosaurus operated in the void, employing those enormous eyes to detect the slightest glimmer of bioluminescence. Picture something larger than a dolphin, shaped like a torpedo with eyes so huge they required bony rings for reinforcement just to avoid collapsing under pressure. And it wasn't the only one pursuing this path. We've discovered these fossils across Europe. So apparently plunging into the abyss to hunt tentacled horrors was a common vocation back then, which reveals plenty about how twisted the Jurassic oceans truly were. But what if you didn't even require massive eyes to become a nightmare? Phosphorosaurus was only 12 feet long. In the realm of prehistoric sea monsters, that basically qualifies as a minnow. But here's the crucial detail about this particular minnow. Possessed forward-facing eyes. You know what else features forward-facing eyes? Owls, hawks, predators that hunt and kill for a living. Most reptiles keep eyes on the sides of their heads because they focus on avoiding becoming prey. Phosphorosaurus. This one had both eyes aimed straight ahead, granting depth perception that would envy a sniper. And those eyes were huge. Not Ophthalmosaurus-sized, but large enough to occupy roughly half its skull. So it clearly operated at night. While the massive, terrifying mosasaurs slept off their daytime rampages, Phosphorosaurus was just beginning its shift. It would glide through the dark waters using those precision-guided eyes to snatch glowing lanternfish and squid that believed they were secure in the night. The really twisted aspect is how masterfully it executed this. We're talking about a reptile that mastered the role of underwater owl 70 million years before actual owls even appeared. It lacked the speed to pursue large prey in daylight, so it simply waited for darkness and became the ocean's original serial killer. And get this, it lived in Japan. So while T-Rex stomped across the land, the waters of prehistoric Japan were patrolled by this compact, precise hunter with giant forward-facing eyes, cruising the gloom and eliminating anything foolish enough to produce its own light. Talk about evolutionary specialization. Most mosasaurs resembled buses. This one was built like a scalpel. And of course, some deep-sea killers adopted a more straightforward method. Viperfish possess teeth so elongated they protrude from their mouths even when closed. These aren't ordinary teeth. These are genuine fangs that curve backward toward the eyes because there's literally no other space for them. This fish has been refining its nightmare appearance for 15 million years. And honestly, it perfected the design on its first attempt. The teeth are so oversized that if a human had proportionally sized fangs, they'd drag along the ground while walking. But here's where it becomes genuinely disturbing. Viperfish employ these teeth by charging their prey at full speed. You'd assume slamming into something tooth-first would wreck your skull badly. Well, Viperfish anticipated that too. They developed a built-in shock absorber. The first bone behind their head functions as a crumple zone that prevents their brain from turning to mush every time they impale something. So this fish simply lingers in the dark, completely motionless, waiting for something to pass nearby. Then it launches forward and skewers whatever happened to be in the vicinity. There's no chase sequence. There's no elaborate hunting technique. Just raw, brutal, lethal efficiency. And the best part, they perform this while glowing. Viperfish feature lights running along their bellies for camouflage from below, and a small lure on their backs to attract prey from above. So they're essentially floating death traps with neon signs reading "free food here." And they're still executing this today. Right now, somewhere in the deep ocean, a viperfish hangs perfectly still with its mouth crammed full of fangs, waiting for dinner to approach close enough to murder. They've pursued this for millions of years and show no signs of stopping. And they are genuinely terrifying, but they're not enormous compared to the goblin shark, which is also still with us today. The goblin shark resembles someone attempting to design a shark based solely on a vague secondhand description from someone who'd never actually seen one. Pink skin, flabby body, and a snout that seems borrowed from an entirely different creature. But that's not even the frightening element. The frightening element is what occurs when it opens its mouth. The goblin shark can propel its entire jaw forward roughly a foot beyond its head. Just like that, suddenly there's an extra mouth where none should exist, packed with long needle-like teeth that seize whatever was unfortunate enough to be nearby. This creature has employed this identical strategy for 125 million years. We know this because we keep discovering fossil goblin sharks that appear identical to the ones swimming around right now. While everything else evolves and adapts and experiments with new approaches, the goblin shark simply floated there thinking, "Nah, I'm fine. This works perfectly for me." And why would it change? It inhabits depths so extreme that nothing disturbs it. It simply drifts through the dark, waiting for something to swim near enough to its face. Then it launches that jaw outward and hauls dinner back into its mouth. No pursuit, no struggle, just pure mechanical efficiency. The strangest aspect is that we rarely encounter them. They reside so profoundly and remain so uncommon that most professional shark researchers have never observed a living specimen. But they're down there right now, drifting through the darkness with their extendable nightmare jaws, repeating the exact same routine they've followed since before grass even existed. And speaking of sharks, there's another nightmare shark still thriving today. Frilled sharks appear ordinary until you examine them closely. Then you realize this creature possesses 300 teeth arranged in 25 rows, and every single one is shaped like a miniature trident. When I say miniature, each tooth remains large enough to inflict serious harm. This shark is essentially a 6-foot-long swimming mouth that has rehearsed the same routine for 80 million years. It glides through the water like an eel, all sinuous and fluid until something ventures too close. Then it strikes forward and swallows prey that's half its own size. Whole. No chewing, no ripping it apart, just straight down the hatch. The really unsettling part is how skillfully it conceals itself. Frilled sharks inhabit caves and crevices during daylight, emerging at night to hunt. They're almost never spotted near the surface. So for most of human history, we remained unaware of their existence. We merely kept finding their teeth in ancient rock layers and assumed they had gone extinct. Then, in the 1800s, some unfortunate fisherman hauled one up, and everyone realized these beings had never departed. They've been down there the entire time, slithering through underwater caves and swallowing squid whole while the rest of the world advanced without them. And here's what truly gets me. They're still doing it. Right now, somewhere in the deep Atlantic, a frilled shark is probably coiled inside some dark crevice, waiting for nightfall so it can hunt using the same 300-tooth mouth design that functioned perfectly well when dinosaurs still roamed the land. This creature was so effective at its role that evolution examined it 80 million years ago and declared, "Yeah, that's terrifying enough," and simply left it unchanged. But some deep-sea monsters discovered even stranger evolutionary solutions. Female anglerfish carry their own personal fishing rod tipped with a glowing lure. They remain perfectly motionless in absolute darkness, waving this little light until something investigates. Then they open wide and swallow whatever fell for the oldest trick imaginable. That's not the bizarre part, though. The bizarre part concerns what happens when a male anglerfish locates a female. He bites onto her and then never releases. In fact, his mouth fuses to her skin, his blood vessels merge with hers, and he essentially transforms into a permanent sperm-producing growth attached to her body. This arrangement has continued for 50 million years, by the way. These creatures are ancient. That was 50 million years of males latching onto females and becoming living, breathing reproductive organs. The females tolerate this setup because locating a mate in the boundless black void of the deep ocean is otherwise nearly impossible. Just like my dating life, the male loses even a functioning digestive system once he attaches. He simply remains there, drawing all nutrients from the female's bloodstream, waiting for her to require his services. Some females carry multiple males attached simultaneously, meaning they swim around with several zombie boyfriends fused to their bodies. Evolution confronted the challenge of finding mates in infinite darkness and responded, "You know what? Let's turn all the males into parasites." And it succeeds so effectively that dozens of different anglerfish species now practice the exact same horrifying routine. The female handles all the hunting, all the survival, all the labor while transporting what are essentially biological sperm banks that were once independent fish. It's the most imbalanced relationship in the animal kingdom. And for some reason, both sides appear entirely content with it. But anglerfish weren't the first to flourish in impossible environments. To locate that creature, we must return to the beginning. 430 million years ago, the ocean floor was ripping apart and expelling water so scalding it should have annihilated everything for miles around. Instead, worms moved in and constructed entire colonies. Now, these weren't ordinary worms. They were tube worms that learned to survive beside underwater volcanoes by partnering with bacteria. The bacteria would consume the toxic chemicals erupting from the vents, and the worms would consume the bacteria. Everyone benefited except anything attempting to live elsewhere on the seafloor because it was essentially a chemical wasteland. We know this occurred because we keep discovering fossilized worm tubes and ancient rocks formed around these volcanic vents. Thousands of tubes clustered together around what used to be black smokers blasting out 700-degree water. The worms lacked eyes, lacked mouths, and lacked any method to capture food independently. They simply stayed inside their tubes, allowing their bacterial partners to handle everything. In fact, they're repeating the exact same partnership in the exact same locations with the exact same bacterial species 400 million years later. And tube worms remain the only organisms tough enough to exist directly beside underwater lava geysers. The truly wild aspect is that these vent sites don't endure long. The volcano deactivates, the chemistry shifts, and the entire community must relocate and locate a new vent elsewhere. But somehow these worms have played this game of volcanic musical chairs for nearly 500 million years. Most creatures devote their time to avoiding being cooked alive. Tube worms have spent 430 million years perfecting the skill of residing inside a natural pressure cooker and converting poison into sustenance. And speaking of ancient survivors, some fish elevated hiding to absurd levels. In 1938, a museum curator received a phone call regarding a strange fish caught off the coast of South Africa. She examined it and instantly recognized she was staring at something that should have been extinct for 66 million years. The coelacanth had been playing the ultimate game of hide and seek. While everyone else contended with asteroid impacts and ice ages and whatever other catastrophes struck the surface, coelacanth simply relocated into deep underwater caves and opted to sit out the entire modern era. Scientists had been uncovering coelacanth fossils for decades, dating all the way back to fish that lived 360 million years ago. They assumed these creatures perished with the dinosaurs. Turns out they simply became exceptionally skilled at evading detection. They were lingering in caves 600 feet down, emerging at night to hunt, and basically maintaining the exact same lifestyle their great times a million grandparents had followed since before trees existed. The fish caught in 1938 created such a sensation that authorities offered a reward for anyone who could locate another. In fact, it required 14 years to find a second specimen that had supposedly vanished since the Cretaceous period. That's elite-level concealment skills right there. And when researchers finally examined living coelacanth, they discovered these fish hadn't bothered evolving much of anything across all that time. Same peculiar fins, same peculiar skulls, and the same peculiar method of giving birth to live young instead of laying eggs. So while everything else evolved and adapted and experimented, coelacanth remained in their caves thinking, "Nah, I'm good. Catch you in a couple million years." But other ancient creatures adopted a different survival strategy in the oceans. Imagine strolling through a forest where every single tree is actually an animal. Well, that's precisely what the ancient seafloor resembled when sea lilies dominated. These organisms grew 60 feet tall and swayed in the currents with their feathery arms extended to capture food drifting past. They weren't lilies and they weren't plants. They were animals that merely happened to resemble underwater flowers. And they blanketed the ocean floor in dense forests stretching for miles. Some of these underwater trees towered higher than a 6-story building. All of them anchored to the seafloor by roots and waved their arms attempting to snag dinner. The insane part is how successful the strategy proved. For hundreds of millions of years, functioning as a giant underwater flower was evidently the optimal approach. Sea lily fossils are so abundant that entire limestone cliffs consist of nothing but their shattered stems and arms. Literally whole mountains composed of dead sea lily fragments. Most were wiped out during the massive extinction at the end of the Permian period. But a few species declared, "You know what? We're simply relocating deeper." And they continued their routine in the abyss. We didn't even realize they survived until the 1800s when someone finally dredged one up from the deep ocean. Today, sea lilies still exist down there performing the exact same actions they followed for 300 million years. Standing on the seafloor, waving their arms in the current, capturing whatever drifts past. They're not as tall as they once were, and their numbers have dwindled, but they remain out there as living flowers on the ocean bottom. Talk about committing to what works. Now we're approaching my favorite prehistoric marine reptile, the Ophthalmosaurus. Ophthalmosaurus literally translates to bottomless lizard, which is probably the most metal name any prehistoric reptile ever received. And unlike most dinosaur names that sound far cooler than the actual creature, this one truly earned it. This being was a plesiosaur that glanced at the deep ocean and decided that was where it wanted permanent residency. Not merely visiting for hunting expeditions, but full-time living in the abyss. So it developed the heaviest bones of any marine reptile ever discovered, dense, thick bones that served as built-in weights to pull it down into the darkness. Most marine reptiles possessed lightweight bones to assist floating and efficient swimming. Ophthalmosaurus reversed that and essentially converted its skeleton into a lead vest. It wanted to sink and it wanted to remain sunk. This creature had lungs the size of barrels to store enough air for prolonged deep dives. Then it would simply plummet like a stone into water so deep that the pressure would instantly crush a human. down there in complete darkness. It would cruise just above the seafloor with those massive eyes scanning for anything foolish enough to wander the void. Small head, long neck, ideal for darting forward and seizing squid or fish before they registered the threat. This wasn't some odd experiment that endured a few thousand years. Ophthalmosaurus practiced this for millions of years in the early Cretaceous. While other plesiosaurs splashed in shallow lagoons, this one resided in the deepest, darkest ocean zones, living a lifestyle straight out of a horror film. The name says everything: bottomless lizard. It also possesses arguably the coolest name of any dinosaur-like creature out there. It's a marine reptile, yet it carries the same naming style as dinosaurs. It literally descended to the bottom and announced, "This is my home now." But farther north, conditions grew even stranger in the oceans. Ophthalmosaurus lived near the Arctic Circle 145 million years ago, which required coping with months of total darkness during polar winter. Most reptiles would have considered that a deal-breaker. Ophthalmosaurus viewed it as a business opportunity. This plesiosaur possessed huge eyes oriented straight upward toward the ocean's ceiling. It spent its entire life gazing at the surface, waiting for something to swim overhead so it could detect the silhouette against whatever minimal light filtered down. When it spotted something above, it would rise from the depths like an underwater horror movie monster and snatch whatever was unlucky enough to be swimming overhead. But here's the really bizarre part. Scientists have found rocks inside this creature's stomach. Not fish bones, not squid beaks, but rocks. The name Ophthalmosaurus means Eye of the North, which fits perfectly considering it was basically a swimming eyeball living at the North Pole. But long before any of these monsters appeared, something made a terrible choice. Trilobites possessed the finest eyes in the ocean for 200 million years. They featured compound eyes with flawless crystal lenses capable of seeing better than most creatures alive today. Then some of them examined the deep ocean and decided to discard all of it. They simply abandoned vision entirely. They now displayed smooth, blank areas where their remarkable eyes once were. No pupils, no lenses, nothing. They voluntarily went blind and migrated into the darkest ocean regions where they spent the next few 100 million years feeling through the mud for dead matter to consume. This wasn't some slow evolutionary shift either. These creatures had perfectly functional eyes. Then their descendants simply didn't. It was as if something concluded that vision was overrated and crawling blindly across the seafloor offered a superior lifestyle. Obviously, there existed an advantage. That's the core of evolution. New traits arise that benefit survival. So there was a reason. And apparently it succeeded brilliantly because blind trilobites proliferated everywhere in the deep ocean. Thousands of them feeling their way through the darkness with their antennae, bumping into one another, stepping across dead fish, living their best lives without any concept of what anything actually looked like. In fact, they endured multiple mass extinctions this way. If you can't see the asteroid approaching, there's no reason to worry about it. The final trilobites on Earth were probably the blind deep-sea varieties, still crawling through the mud, still probing for food with their antennae. Utterly unaware, they represented the last members of one of the most successful animal groups in Earth's history. Sometimes ignorance truly is bliss. But today's deep ocean contains its own unstoppable scavengers that resemble creepy bugs. Giant isopods are what results when you take a regular pill bug and feed it nothing but protein powder and steroids for 30 million years. These creatures reach the size of footballs and can survive 5 years without eating. 5 years. That's insane. They also appear creepy as hell. There's a giant isopod in captivity that refused food for half a decade and then died. Probably just to emphasize to humans that we don't deserve to keep them. They inhabit the deep ocean floor where food is so scarce that when something finally dies and sinks to their level, it feels like Christmas morning. Hundreds of these massive ocean bugs will detect the scent from miles away and swarm the carcass like the world's most disturbing family reunion. Once they locate a dead whale or fish, they gorge until they're so stuffed they can barely move. Literally like Christmas dinner. Then they simply remain there for months, maybe years, slowly digesting while awaiting the next fatality to descend from above. The weirdest part is how expertly they wait. Most animals would starve within weeks without food. Giant isopods have elevated waiting to an art form. They'll sit perfectly motionless on the seafloor, doing absolutely nothing for longer than most people have been alive. And when they finally encounter a predator, they simply roll into a ball and wait for it to depart. No fleeing, no fighting, just complete defensive mode until the threat loses interest and leaves. They're essentially the ocean's version of that friend who handles problems by pretending they don't exist. 30 million years of evolution, and their survival strategy amounts to eating once every few years and ignoring their issues. But even those survivors appear ordinary compared to what followed. Scientists discovered a fossil that looked like someone had bent a giant squid shell into a paperclip and decided that was a perfectly reasonable way to live for 200 years. That's Ophthalmosaurus. And yes, you heard correctly. It lived for 200 years. This creature outlived entire dinosaur species known for longevity. While shaped like office supplies, very few things on Earth live longer than 200 years. I can only think of the Greenland shark offhand. Not many creatures have ever achieved that lifespan. Most ammonites coiled their shells into tight spirals because that's efficient and logical. Ophthalmosaurus examined that design and responded, "Actually, what if I simply grew in a big U shape instead?" Then it proceeded to float through the ancient ocean for 2 centuries, resembling a 10-foot-tall paperclip with tentacles. The shell shape was so peculiar that when paleontologists first encountered these fossils, they believed they were viewing multiple different animals somehow fused together. Nobody could accept that one creature would deliberately grow itself into that form and then endure the consequences for 200 years. But apparently the paperclip lifestyle proved highly successful. Ophthalmosaurus would float vertically in the water with its head dangling from the bottom of the U, hovering there and grabbing whatever swam past. And they did this for an extraordinarily long time. The same individual ammonite floating in the same spot shaped like a paperclip for longer than Canada has existed as a country. They counted the growth rings in the shell and found 200 of them, meaning this creature was already ancient while still alive. Evolution invested millions of years perfecting the spiral shell design. Then Ophthalmosaurus arrived and decided to reinvent the wheel as a pretzel. Yet even that oddity fades beside the ocean's first aliens, Charnia. 565 million years ago, before fish, before sharks, before basically any animals you would recognize, the deep ocean floor was covered in entities that appeared designed by aliens who had never observed Earth life before. Charnia was a 2-meter-tall feather made of living tissue that possessed no mouth, no stomach, no eyes, and no ability to move. It simply stood on the seafloor, swaying in the current, absorbing nutrients directly through its skin from the surrounding water for tens of millions of years. No predators existed yet, so nothing disturbed it. No competition for food, so it didn't need to hunt. No reason to evolve rapidly, so it remained exactly the same, doing exactly nothing for longer than complex life has existed anywhere else. These beings blanketed the ancient seafloor in vast fields. Thousands of them, all identical, all motionless, all simply standing there absorbing chemicals from seawater while the rest of Earth figured out what evolution was supposed to accomplish. They featured fractal patterns built into their bodies that repeated at every level of magnification. Perfectly mathematical designs that wouldn't appear out of place in a computer program. Except this existed 500 million years before computers or math or anything capable of creating such precise patterns even existed. When Charnia finally went extinct, it left no descendants. Nothing alive today is even remotely related to it. It was an evolutionary experiment that ran for 30 million years. Then it vanished completely, leaving only fossils to prove it ever existed. The deep ocean's first complex life forms were alien feathered creatures with fractal patterns that fed by standing perfectly still and absorbing nutrients from the water. Honestly, there are probably millions more animal species even weirder that we don't even know about, because that is the scary part about the prehistoric ancient ocean. There are so many species we've found, and yet there are so many we haven't. There are probably monsters that once lived down there that we would think were aliens because of how crazy they are. What do you think is still down there today? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. And if you want to watch another video of mine, you should check out the one on the screen.